Hey, everybody, and welcome back to part two of the podcast with Jeff Ash. And we are talking all about intuitive eating. So, welcome back, Jeff.
Hey, glad to be back, even though it's a little early here in my
I
part of the world.
I do apologize. The children are off on half term over here, so I've had to wake Jeff up a little bit earlier so we could get this podcast in. And the first podcast was awesome. And we are. Are you sponsored by Bang there, Jeff? You've just
Uh,
held
yeah, we are now. Yeah, I was for
the podcast
our
is.
video watchers. You can see how I'm mitigating some of
Yeah,
the
Jeff, if
earliness.
you watch it on YouTube, if I am on YouTube, go subscribe.
Yes.
Jeff's just held up an energy drink as if he's sponsored by them, like
Yep.
product placement. I'm looking at you now, Jeff, a bit suspect, but let's get into intuitive eating and potentially drinking also.
Yeah.
No judgment with what you're drinking
Definitely.
at all. But hey, so we talked about the first six principles in episode one. So if you're coming into this thinking, well, they've just went straight into this, well, go back, listen to the introduction we gave Jeff and also the first six principles. We're going to go into the following four because there is 10 in total. So, Jeff, give us a brief reminder of what those first six are, and then we can just go into the seventh if you'd like.
Yeah, sounds great. So, yeah, definitely go check out that first episode where we go a little bit more in detail into these. But just as kind of a reminder, the first six that we talked about, a lot of those address uh, kind of ways of tuning into your body that help you regulate your food intake in a way that is right for you as an individual. Because each one of us are different. Ian is going to need a different amount of food than I am, and also he's going to have different food preferences and those kinds of things. His physiology is going to be slightly different. He's going to respond to hunger and fullness in a little bit different way. He's going to feel it in a little bit different way, and so these first six really help to kind of bring that to a place where that works for you as an individual. So the first one was rejecting the diet mentality, that first principle, which is essentially just putting the idea of intentional weight loss on the back burner because we know that that can often interfere with the process of really developing some of these other principles when you're focused on trying to lose weight, and then you start going into principle number two, honoring your hunger. Well, if you're fixated on losing weight as a primary outcome, it's really easy to tell yourself, well, am I really hungry? Nah, I'm not that hungry. I can hold off. And then that can, of course, then later backfire. And I mean, even people who are coaching intentional fat loss understand the importance of really trying to be honest with ourselves when we're looking at hunger and fullness and some of those other things too. And so, yeah. So principle number two is honoring your hunger, basically eating enough. If your body is telling you it needs food, providing that. Then number three was making peace with food. And that is the idea of giving yourself unconditional permission to eat any food at any time. And that can be a really hard one, as we talked about, to wrap your head around because that goes typically against a lot of diet advice and typical nutrition advice, where you leave out certain foods. Certain foods are good and bad, and that kind of thing. Um, the principle number four then is challenging the food police, and that is basically those rules: what foods are good, what foods are bad, and challenging that idea, because we know that there really isn't any one food that is inherently bad for us. Just in general, cookies are not bad for us. I mean, obviously, if you only ate cookies, that's probably not particularly healthy. But eating cookies on a regular basis, or now and then, or whatever works for you, is certainly not inherently bad in the context of an overall balanced, nutritionally dense diet. And then principle number five is the importance of satisfaction in our eating. And that is the idea where we just eat, we don't just eat for fuel. Food is not just fuel. We should be satisfied in our eating. And we know that when you do eat in a way that brings satisfaction to your body, it is much easier to regulate your food intake in a way that's right for you. If you're always depriving yourself of the foods that you enjoy, that have cultural significance, so social significance, if you're always depriving yourself of that, those are some key factors that lead to kind of problems with binge eating. Because if you're eating Halo Top ice cream as an example, and you really don't like it as much as the real stuff, and you were really craving the real stuff, but you thought, well, I'll eat Halo Top just to sort of curb my appetite. If it doesn't really hit the spot, it's very likely that later you're going to think, well, I'm going to go ahead and have that ice cream anyway. And so you sort of defeated the purpose. And then number six is feeling your fullness. So that kind of wraps the whole thing up. You honor your hunger, you eat for satisfaction, you eat the foods that bring you enjoyment, but at the same time, you're tuning into fullness and you're actually recognizing when your body has had enough, both that not just stuffed that physical feeling, but enough in those other biological areas. We feel hunger in different places than just the growling in our stomach. And so the same with fullness, we can reach a level of satiety without being stuffed. So it's kind of good to be able to recognize what works for you and what where your body, how to recognize when your body has had enough. And so as you can see, all those principles really tie in nicely to help kind of regulate our food intake and automatically adjust. In many ways, kind of an auto regulation. We hear that term in training sometimes, but auto-regulating your food intake based on the needs of your body. So, I often, when I do deadlifts and squats on the same day, I typically end up a lot hungrier than if I'm doing bicep curls and tricep push downs in my workouts, because I tend to expend more energy and that kind of thing. And so, anyway, these principles kind of all help you to sort of really essentially auto-regulate your food intake.
And I guess it's kind of giving people the permission to auto-regulate as well, because based off there, like for example, this week, I'm taking a deload from the gym and it's not programmed in. It's just in because I know if I continue on, it's going to lead to burnout, and I'm
Yeah.
starting to feel those symptoms that, going beyond your training capacity does. And then when you go over the edge, it's going to take longer to kind of bring in. So it's the same with, diet and weight management, weight loss. And sometimes you can burn out a little bit, and it's understanding when to be kinder to yourself, which really should be all of the time. And what we're probably going to go and continue on to talk about, people, I hope at the end of these podcasts go, you know what? It's just common sense. It's just easy. It's really easy. Why am I constantly looking at all of these external things, the training programs, the diet plans, when in actual fact, I can just move forward with this this different perspective around my nutrition and health. But cool.
Yeah, definitely. And this concept of auto regulation and these first six principles really rely on the ability to trust in your body to tell you what it needs. I mean, our bodies are biologically designed to function in this way. I mean, our hunger cues are there to tell us when we need more energy, and our body is it doesn't, if we try and trick it, it's still going to keep telling us, yeah, that's not going to work for me. It works for a minute, but it's not going to work for me long term. I really do need this energy. And at the same time, it's going to fight it when you're giving it too much. It's going to be, and you don't feel as good when you're overeating in the same way. And so, really understanding that you can trust your body, and if I think dieting teaches us that we can't trust our body, that we need those external cues, like you were talking about, to dictate what it is that we should be doing and how much food we should be eating and all of those kinds of things. But it really is a matter of learning to kind of retrust your body to tell you, like what you described there with your training too. Hey, I need a deload week. And so, you know your body well enough, and you can trust your body that it's going to tell you when it needs a deload week, and you're best off if you will honor that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And the big word that we probably, will talk about is, consistency. And everybody is unfortunately consistently on off, and inevitably they're always starting again. Whereas if they auto-regulate, they're constantly on, they're never off.
Yeah.
But it isn't as kind of, I guess, sexy, or like I guess the word extreme would be the best one that everybody thinks they have to go to. They want to lose weight. We've touched this a bit in the last podcast, that they've got to go to some sort of unsustainable world in order to just improve like body composition or anything like that. And you know, if we had a shot every time we went on a tangent, would end up pretty drunk at the end of the
Yeah.
podcast. So let's kind of keep focused in. Let's go on to
Yeah.
the next principle number 7, and we can go on numerous tangents about these
Yeah.
two.
Yeah, well, and some of those tangents are important. I think
Oh,
they
definitely.
really tie these things together. And so, but yeah, number 7 then is, after we talked about the, kind of the hunger and fullness and satisfaction and stuff, is coping with your emotions with kindness. And so that's the way that they describe it in the latest edition of the Intuitive Eating book. They used to say cope with your emotions without food, which is part of that process. The reason they changed the name of it was that a lot of people got fixated on the idea that emotional eating is inherently bad, and they didn't want people to get that idea, because we know, it not just intuitive eating coaches, how important it is to give our clients the freedom to eat for emotional reasons at times. I mean, it's just, you want other ways of coping with those emotions. Like, there's nothing wrong with coming home from a hard day and saying, "Man, I could really use a glass of wine and a bowl of ice cream," and just kind of chill out. And that's eating for an emotional reason. But if that's our go-to at any time that we're emotional or stressed out or something like that, that's when it can become a problem. So there's this other principle, coping with your emotions with kindness, and in this one, you're kind of recognizing that food restriction, kind of both physically and mentally, can trigger kind of the loss of control, and often that feels like emotional eating, when in reality it goes back to the hunger and fullness, where we're not honoring that. And so, in this process where we're talking about coping with our emotions with kindness, it's recognizing that we shouldn't beat ourselves up for those kinds of things, that that these emotions are a natural thing, and that there's many ways that we can cope with those things.
Mm. And I kind of work primarily with like emotional eating, and it's kind of going, well, yeah, you have, we've spoke about this, unconditional permission to eat, and there's nothing quote unquote wrong with having that glass of wine or bowl of ice cream, because it's all part of a multifaceted approach and a dynamic and fluid system. And we've just spoke about auto regulation as
Mm-hmm.
well. Everybody's looking for the as I said last time, the blueprint, the hack, the system that they can stick to. But you have to move the goalposts quite a lot, given the situation that you find yourself in. And what's probably the thing that kind of goes up and down most frequently across a given day, a moment, within a moment, something can trigger you, something can stress you out. Now, if you create this like neural pathway that every time you feel stressed, anxious, upset, angry, you eat, then obviously dealing with those emotions is something that's going to be hugely important. How you internalize those. If you are taking care of the other principles, like honoring your hunger and not having like rigid food rules and so on and so forth, you're going to be far less prone to emotionally and binge eat, because obviously it's going to become really challenging, really inconvenient. At times, it's almost like a child kicking off, like, I want food now. And if you are understanding of that voice, and you can listen to that voice and certainly negotiate with that voice, it makes it far easier not to always do what potentially people have always done, which is emotional or binge eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting with all those different kinds of emotions that we experience, like anxiety and loneliness and boredom, and all these different emotions, is that there's some interesting research where they found that each one of the emotions that we have has a physiological response to it as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so not only do we feel it kind of in our mind and in our heart and that kind of thing, but there's different parts of the body that people experience these different emotions in. And so that's some stuff that we actually have in the intuitive eating, kind of some of the materials that we use to help people really reconnect with their body. Part of the process is reconnecting with these hunger and fullness cues, but also it's is kind of learning to recognize and connect with how those different emotions impact us physiologically, so that we can start to recognize those, and we can recognize when we're anxious or lonely and bored, and how that impacts our body. And it helps us to then reconnect with our body, because if we're better connected with our body in general, then we are going to have a better time of recognizing those food intake cues as well. And so it's really interesting how the human body works. It's so much more complicated than, yeah, hey, just if you want to lose weight, eat a little less and move a little more, and call it a day, which is, it often is kind of minimized in that way.
Yeah, it's really hard because obviously we're trying to, it's very subjective to that individual as well. So, we spoke a little bit about, and this is working alongside a coach, why quite often it's really important because, if you like yourself, if like myself, you do like weekly coaching calls with your clients,
Mm-hmm.
you ask them to bring their challenges into the call, and then you explore and you ask them what they think, and you get really them to start, thinking about the overall narrative of those behaviors and how they could maybe best move forward, instead of like giving them all of these, right, maybe you need to do this, maybe don't expose yourself to that, maybe track your calories and like control yourself. It's actually like, can we work about around some freedom,
Mm-hmm.
creating more freedom, more mental clarity, so that you're in that situation and not feeling so up a height or anxious.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a good point. And I think, when I went to going to weekly coaching sessions and coaching calls with people, um, it was such a great move, and it's been so much more effective. It's really interesting how a lot of calls, I talk to a lot of people about this. A lot of calls have nothing to do with food.
Yeah.
It's, you're a nutritionist coaching someone on their food, on their nutrition, and yet a lot of the calls have nothing to do with food, because it kind of comes back to this one here, this coping with your emotions with kindness, and helping people to understand and recognize that food won't fix any of the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it can kind of comfort for the short term and distract from pain, and sometimes even numb you and stuff like that. But it won't solve the problem really. And and so it's not so much that we want to get people away from eating for emotional reasons,
Mm-hmm.
or that you would think of, okay, I need to stop eating emotionally. But it's more, hey, what am I trying to do when I'm eating for emotional reasons? What am I trying to resolve, numb, distract from? And instead of just using food, it's finding other things. And so, when I'm working with somebody who's struggling with emotional eating, we don't just yank it out from under them, which is often what you hear in diets. It's kind of like, oh, you just need more discipline, and just, that's a food craving, so just get it out of the house, that kind of thing. Well, for a lot of people, food is their, if it's their primary coping mechanism, you can't just yank it out from under them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a lot of people don't realize too, is that, oh, I just need to stop emotionally eating. And it's like, no, you can't yank the only coping mechanism you have until you've replaced it with something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so often it's a process of helping people to identify for themselves. This is obviously something that as a coach I can help guide somebody to discovering, but I can't tell them what to do, because it's going to be so different for each person. But finding ways that you can cope with your emotions kindly with yourself in ways that don't always involve food. And so it's learning to kind of, instead of yanking it out, it's more of an adding in kind of a process. So you're adding in other ways of coping, and as a result, you're going to use food less and less and less. And so that's such a really important part of this process too, and where this, I think this principle is one of the really really important ones that really ties a lot of it all together, because it really helps people to nurture that emotional and the psychological aspect of health in a way that's going to ultimately support their physiological health.
Mm. And I think as well, like a lot of people who do like, and again, emotional eating, like if it's a lovely summer's day, and you're feeling a certain way, cracking open a beer is like, it's like, what, I fancy a beer, but it doesn't mean that I have to drink an entire crate of beer
Yeah,
because of that state, and it's like, what, if I've had a bit of a shitty day, I'm gonna have a little glass of wine, but it doesn't have to turn into two, three bottles. And it's just people trusting themselves to open the bottle of wine and
mm-hmm.
also put the lid back on or put the cork back in
Yeah,
if you're high upper class
yeah.
and putting it back in. But yeah, so it's like I guess it's people looking at themselves a little bit more and their behaviors and what they think that they should do, or it's going to be largely cultivated by what everybody does also. So, recognizing like you are an individual that needs some form of individual intervention
Mm-hmm.
around your eating patterns and behaviors and mindset and emotions, and how to best manage and structure that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you brought up alcohol there in those examples, and interestingly enough, you can apply these same principles with your alcohol
Mm-hmm.
intake too. And I recently saw someone did a podcast on basically intuitive drinking, and it was applying these principles to your drinking. You know, again, honoring your hunger, fullness, satisfaction, coping with your emotions with ways that don't involve alcohol only, and all of those kinds of things. You can still apply that, and from an addiction standpoint, there's probably other things that you can do. That's not something I have experience with myself, and but in general, this can help a person to learn to listen to their body and regulate their alcohol intake in very much the same way that they would food intake by well, and shoot, going into the next principle, might as well move on to that. Number 8 is respecting your body. And that's really, that again, that kind of ties and builds on what we were talking about in these other things. And so there's a reason behind making it important to honor your hunger, feel your fullness, eat for satisfaction, uh, coping with your emotions. And that is not because from the intuitive eating perspective, we would be doing all of those things not with the end goal being changing the size and shape of our body. That may come along, it may not, but it's out of respect for our body. And so, principle number 8 is respecting your body. And I think when you think of it in those terms, you're doing it for the right reason. You know, not that it's wrong to try and change how your body looks or the size of it or the strength of it or those kinds of things, but that can really get in the way. But whenever we're doing it out of pure respect for our body, you really can't go wrong, and you can't fail either when you're doing it for that reason, because it's more of a learning process, it's a growth process, and it's ultimately more rewarding and fulfilling from kind of a holistic perspective.
And I think, when it comes to respecting the body, my first thing goes to thinking of like women who are chronically over exercising, undernourished, and then we're dealing with potential like energy availability issues, and then we kind of can go into bone fractures and loss of menstrual cycle. And it's the same for guys, like libido goes out the window and
Mm-hmm.
feeling just like absolute rubbish in the pursuit of this physical, ideal that they've got in the head. And then, things can go even further down the eating disordered route, which is largely kind of, we've got so much access now and availability to people's lives, social media, media in general, which is probably just a podcast on its own, to talk about whether that's a positive or negative influence. But
Yeah.
uh, people of a certain age just may not be able to kind of see beyond the surface level stuff and understand potentially what's going on there, and it kind of leads people down a dark road. Maybe just working with people that are unqualified, unfortunately, and it seems like, especially in the fitness industry, the only qualification you need is a big bum or a set of abdominals, and
Yeah.
that kind of puts you ahead of, say, people like ourselves who have been in the game for 15, 20 years, who have been there, done that, and all of that. And that's the unfortunate position we find ourselves in. And that's the people that we're trying to combat, I guess, with our discussions.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, a lot of this is accepting the fact that our bodies are going to be different. You mentioned social media, and that just gives us such a distorted perspective on what we should look like, what we should strive for, and even what we're capable of. Because you look at some of these physiques, and clearly certain people have genetics that predisposes them to a certain body shape. And I could never get to a certain body shape that just doesn't really align. I mean, we see this in high level bodybuilding where all the guys are juiced, they're all training as a full-time job, and you look at their physiques and they're dramatically different. Their abs are different. The way that their size is distributed is different. Some guys have really hard time building calves, even if they're just juiced to the gills, and it just doesn't matter. There's certain genetic things that impact each one of us, and taking that back then to kind of the general population, it's even we don't know, none of us or most of us don't have time to devote all of this time to just changing the appearance or the size and shape of our body, and so part of this is just accepting and respecting the fact that there is this diversity of our bodies, and it can be really hard because you have society telling you should look a certain way, and accepting the fact that that's probably not a very realistic goal for me, and but yeah, I think
No,
that's just really important.
it depends what like bubble you're in as well, because like
Hmm.
especially when sometimes you enter this fitness bubble, you start to believe that like the pinnacle of happiness is like looking that certain way, and I imagine like in like the corporate world, having that financial, like the six
Exactly.
figure business or whatever it is, it's just touting, and then anything less is ultimately a failure, and people start doing silly, unsustainable things, burning themselves out, self doubt creeps in, question, and they just give in, they quit. What's the
Hmm.
point? Whereas we're kind of going, well, what again? We talked about this in the first episode. Is what do you want? Like, what do you actually want, and how do you want your life to look like? What brings you true happiness and fulfillment? Um, and that's the reality of the situation. Instead of them operating in this all or nothing, this black or white, we're like, right, let's find out where you want to be in the middle of that, because that's where you really want to be.
Yeah, yeah, and that all or nothing mentality is so hard to get past because it seems that people put on the front that they only talk about what is working, what's positive. It seems like, especially in social media. So when you look at social media, the assumption is that everybody is effortlessly losing weight,
Yeah.
that everybody's getting a six pack without really doing much of anything, that everybody's able to build muscle, that everybody's able to run a marathon, that all of these things, and it just is not the case, because what you're seeing is all the people who are being successful in the moment posting their putting their best foot forward and showing
Mm-hmm.
uh, a snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
What you're not seeing is all the people who are struggling to maintain lost weight because they've been using an unsustainable approach to diet and exercise and those kinds of things. And so really, again, coming back to that respecting your body is just kind of doing this out of respect for your body and what you really need and desire as an individual at the
Mm-hmm.
core of you, the values that you have. And I know that's something you talk about I've heard you talk about that a lot, the kind of discovering the values that are what's important to you as an individual.
And the people that I generally work with, business owners or like professionals, or certainly have like full-time jobs, also
Hmm.
families, So if I'm working with women, um, they've generally had children, and respecting your body, the fact that you've produced a child, but
Yeah.
almost like you're beating yourself up. The same with guys. It's like, yes, you have maybe put your health on the back burner, but you've done that in order to provide for your family and
Hmm.
have the lifestyle that you want. And it's now, listen, we can now, it doesn't mean you have to switch off from everything there. What I'm going to do is give you things that you can do, not things that you can't do, are the things that you think that you have to do. And I think that's why where people really trip up with this health and fitness thing is they automatically think straight away endless amounts of cardio or training, constantly in the gym, eating like a rabbit, where all the friends and family eating, all this indulgent food. And it's like, if that was the case, I probably wouldn't want to do it either. But I certainly wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned, there a lot of the things that people do that contribute to them finding themselves in the position where their health is suffering, or their ability to move in a way that it would be really more enjoyable, is because they have been trying to make a good life for themselves and for their family. And so it's not, in many ways, it's not that they did anything wrong. It wasn't, they didn't end up in the place that they're at because of necessarily of selfishness or doing anything wrong. And so I think it's good that we help people identify that, hey, you know what, I understand how you got to where you are. You've been trying to do the best you can for yourself and your family, and but maybe you haven't been respecting your own body and the needs of it in the best way. And so let's just kind of start to shift your focus a little bit, rather than the all or nothing of like, okay, well, you got to stop everything you're doing now and do the exact opposite and like pour everything into this now. And I think I've seen that a lot in people where they go
Mm.
from this, they were doing absolutely nothing for their own physical health, and then they turn it around and it's like everything now is poured into that. And that's not healthy either, because then you start to, okay, maybe you were neglecting your family some because you were so tunnel visioned on your work. Now you're neglecting them on the other side because now you're tunnel visioned on your body changes and that kind of thing. Just this all or nothing mentality.
Yeah, and I find sometimes, especially those that are really successful within business, especially that they've built up all of this stuff, like they automatically assume that should just be very uh, transfer very easily into their body compositional goals, so they think, right, I've got all of this discipline in business, yet when it comes to fitness and health, it kind of works so differently with the
Oh yeah.
dynamics of their life, especially if a lot of these corporate people or business owners depend on networking and things like that. They just struggle to navigate those things. And that's why they get end up spinning the wheel. So it's trying to meet them where they're at, remember that they have to start somewhere and get them to a point where they are kind of autonomous and confident within their decisions. But again, they have to almost have a bit of a clean slate mentality within moving forward, as is with principle number one, reject the diet mentality. It's that's kind of like almost like, right, you're here to, we're going to be looking at all of these things, whether it affects this thing or not. We're not primarily focused on that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. So right, number eight. Are we up? No, nine.
Yeah, that was eight. We are on to
Oh,
nine. Yeah,
nine.
two more
Wow.
left.
God.
Imagine that. Yeah. So, well, the ninth principle is really interesting because the way that in the intuitive eating framework that they describe it is movement. Feel the difference. So the idea here is that you kind of set aside sort of the militant, very structured exercise or training. Not that any of that's bad, but some people that doesn't really interest them, but they do it because they feel like they're supposed to do it. So I'm in several different fitness groups that are very traditionally fitness minded. And a lot of it in there is, it's not just working out, it's training, so there's this mentality that no, you can't just go to the gym and play around on the equipment with
Mhm.
like no aim. Like you can't just go there and just do a random circuit and then the next workout go there and just play around on the pulleys, and then the next time do something else. And a group class, like just this random mishmash of things, and there's actually nothing wrong with that. That's very beneficial to your body. Now, is
Mhm.
that going to get you stage ready for bodybuilding competition? No. But this mentality that if you do that, if you just go and play around and just sort of do this unstructured sort of movement, that you're not doing it right. So kind of rethinking, reimagining physical activity and movement from the perspective of what do you find enjoyable, what makes your body feel good, and doing it, coming at it from that perspective. So obviously there's value in training. If you're a professional athlete, you're going to have to suck it up and train in a certain way that may not be joyful or enjoyable all the time.
Mhm.
But ultimately, that training helps you to then be able to perform in the activity that you find enjoyment in. So, like for me, my ninja obstacle course training, I have to do things. I don't like doing cardio, but doing cardio helps me to perform at that other stuff better. I don't necessarily like doing certain plyometric exercises and stuff like that. It's it's fine, but it's not particularly fun.
Mhm.
But yet it helps build my body up in such a way that then I can perform at the obstacles better. And so there is a time and place for that, but not everybody has those goals. I mean, if you're just wanting to play around with your grandkids and move around and enjoy pastimes and different things of life and playing, playing city league softball team or city league basketball or something like that, and you just need to be in generally decent health, then you can do so many different things that are so much more enjoyable instead of this all or nothing mentality with your exercise routine.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I'll tell people, they automatically come with these assumptions, and they're like, oh, I don't have to, you, they automatically think you're going to send them to the gym or whatever, and you're just like, listen, you don't have to, quote unquote, exercise full stop. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to move around, but like what that movement is, like exercise in and itself, like formal exercise, is designed to provide some sort of stimulus that you want to kind of in an area you want to see improvement. So if I want to run, I'll get better running. I'll run. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've got a background in bodybuilding and I enjoy that, and I do train, but that's based around my goals and
Right.
what I like. It's not I'm putting that particular kind of bias, if you'd like, onto my clients. Again, I'm a coach. What I do is what I do. All
Mm-hmm.
right. Um, Certain people might be attracted to me because of that, but they're going to very much realize that the way I'm working with them is all about them and what they want to do. I've got clients who do CrossFit or don't go to the gym full stop. They just go for walks or they do whatever, and I support them with their needs. And I also like say, people who have tried lifting weights and it just doesn't click. They don't enjoy it, and I'm like, you're not enjoying it. It doesn't click. Don't do it. You don't have to do it. And then they're almost
Yeah.
conflicted because they're like, yeah, but I want this, and I'm like, yeah, but like, is that what you want, or is that what you think you want? And it's almost giving them that permission to kind of go out there and explore different things because everybody's almost so stuck in on like running, bodybuilding, CrossFit, like or within that. Whereas like Jeff's jumping around being a ninja, and
Yeah.
that's fun. Like there's mixed martial arts, like even just for the hobbyists, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu's surging, like boxing, you don't have to get in the ring. Same with bodybuilding, you don't have to get on the stage. It's just being willing to try different things. It's not program hopping. You might find you get a blend of all these different things,
Yeah.
so it's just about finding the Jeff training
Mm-hmm.
protocol, the Ian training protocol, something that you can consistently do for the rest of your life and enjoy.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned program hopping. That's kind of a good example of where in this fitness, like when we're just wrapped up in this diet and fitness mentality, that program hopping is just so frowned upon. But when you really stop and think about it, yes, if you're really trying to train with specific goals in mind, then program hopping is not really the best way to go about that.
Mm.
But for the average person who just wants to be healthier, stronger, fitter, there's nothing wrong with program hopping. There's nothing wrong with just doing P90X this week and doing yoga and Pilates next week, and then doing some Jim Stepani bodybuilding program the next week, and then goofing around with this over here. And yes, there's certain kinds of you can end up hurting yourself if you're not careful in how you're approaching it, if you're pushing yourself too hard in these areas. But ultimately, when you think about it, if that's enjoyable to you and you just like to try all kinds of different movement and just wing it week to week, you're still going to reap probably the bulk of any health benefits that you can get just from moving your body more and just from doing some different resistance kinds of activities and that kind of thing. And I think that's where that whole all or nothing mindset, or that whole train like an athlete mindset, or worrying about which form of exercise burns the most calories and burns the most fat and those kinds of things. I think that's where you can get distracted. And when you come at it from that perspective of, often you hear it in the intuitive eating crowd, it's joyful movement. And really that's kind of what it's all about. If you want something that's going to be sustainable long term, it really does need to be something enjoyable, like what you do with your bodybuilding type training. You clearly enjoy that kind of physical activity and training, and where you might not enjoy what I'm doing as much, and so it may not be as sustainable to you.
Well, funnily enough, Jeff, I've signed up for the Great North Run, which is a half marathon. Never,
Oh wow, that's cool.
And that's in September. What is this? April now, and like I've never done it, and the reason I'm doing it is because I've never done it, and I want to try something else. And you know what? If I don't enjoy it, I don't enjoy it. But like,
Yeah.
I like to tick that one off. It's a big thing in England, the Great North Run. It's everybody, and it's very hard to get in, and I'm getting in because of doing it for a charity, part of the networking group that I'm a part of.
Oh, cool.
But it's just something that were like it. They just said it, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Why not? That it's a decent challenge. It's something to focus on, and it's just exploring different things. If at the back of it, I start getting into running more, and I maybe start like, toning down the lifting weight, so I can now incorporate a little bit more running instead of it being in addition, because this is another thing that people can start doing. They're just adding things, and it's the same with the diet. They're now adding this, and they end up like it's clean eating, for example. The diets just get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner before they're like, they basically can't eat anything because of the chemicals, and everybody's trying to be the best quote unquote athlete there is. But it's like jack of all trades, master of none. It's okay to be the jack of all trades. Okay, you don't have to be the master of one. But if you want to be the master of one, something's got to give somewhere, but you've also got to have a really important reason why you want to be doing what you want to do, and it should resonate with you. You should enjoy it. You should like not hate the process. And I guess that's what we're trying to really get out with the exercise choices that you make.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's cool that, you kind of bring up this run that you're talking about doing, and how sometimes it's perfectly fine to try something where maybe you don't enjoy the day-to-day things that you're doing, but you enjoy the overall process because you're challenging yourself in a way that you've never challenged yourself. And that can kind of translate into other areas of your life where you're kind of stepping outside your comfort zone, and you're learning to do things that are hard, and learning to stay disciplined and motivated to do things that maybe aren't fun, but that is contributing to an overall long-term goal. So and that can carry over into so many other areas of your life. And so, there's certainly value in doing things like like doing something that's hard and a lot of hard work and requires that dedication and maybe not fun, joyful every day of the process, but ultimately at the end you might find, wow, this was incredibly fulfilling for me.
Yeah, and sometimes like with that as well, I know you touched on it in the last podcast, it's like, what happens after the run? Sometimes people put, right, I'm training for this run, they do the run, and then they just go way back to square one, but then
Mm-hmm.
that perpetuates, oh, I was in such good shape, I was so fit, I did the run, and then it's almost so hard. And when we talk about that catapult analogy, and it's like this purposeful weight loss, when I reach my goal. It's like
Yeah.
that is the run, that is the big event. You've now reached your goal. Now what? And it's almost like sometimes they've burnt themselves out in
Mm-hmm.
the process of getting there. So even though we're saying, hey, it's great to have a challenge, but it's also don't hang all of your happiness and self-worth on the achievement of that thing. It's great. What have I learned from that? I always say to people, listen, I've got a fantastic baseline as far as my nutrition's concerned, as far as my exercise habits are concerned. I kind of know what I'm doing with
Mm-hmm.
this. It's a short-term challenge, but it's going to obviously tie in with the big picture of everything, who I am, what I do, what I value. And hey, if in the a byproduct of doing this is I enjoy running, which I'm sure I will. I love going out for walks and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. I'll just walk a bit faster, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's my mentality towards it.
Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah, man. Number 10 are we up to? This is the
Yeah.
final one. Wow.
Yeah, this is the last one. And this one, um, this is one that often people misunderstand with intuitive eating. And this is honor your health with gentle nutrition. And so it's at the end for a reason. And you may be wondering, well, shouldn't nutrition be maybe up at the top? Just kind of learn some basic principles before you jump into this whole thing. But really, it can interfere with the process of developing these other principles. So if you're focused on nutritional quality and all of those kinds of things, it can really interfere with the satisfaction aspect of it. When you start thinking in terms of the calorie content of foods rather than the how they sustain you from meal to meal and how they make you feel, how they impact your hunger, and that kind of thing. Well, then you start to miss out on some of the benefits of those other principles. And so now, again, as I mentioned in the first episode, we don't just go step one, step two, step three. It's not a 10-step program. Some people, we jump to honor to the gentle nutrition part early on. Other people, especially people who are struggling with disordered eating or orthorexia, where they're or coming from a clean eating background, often we need to put that way at the end because they've been overly fixated on that nutrition part, and so we need to work on the other things without even talking about the nutrition part. And so, but generally, what you're doing in this with this principle is making food choices that honor your health, that taste good, while making you feel good. And we know that, I mean, when we eat foods that are generally more nutritionally dense, in general, they make us feel better. When that's kind of habitually what we're eating more of, then we tend to feel better. But if we're doing it because somebody told us that we're supposed to do it, then it really impacts us emotionally in a very different way than if we eat that way through a process of discovery, saying, oh, yeah, when I eat these foods, I feel better in this way. When I eat too much candy or sugar, when I'm focused on or heavily processed foods, my body doesn't feel as good as when I have a bit more minimally processed foods. So it's not that we're cutting out processed foods, which is kind of another diet thing. They're like, oh, you got to get all the processed food out. No, instead we're saying, well, how does my body feel when I eat a bit more fiber, a few more vegetables? When I'm eating enough protein, how does my body feel? And so we're sort of adding to our food rather than taking things out. And then overall, over that long period of time and going through this process, then eventually our nutrition ends up being in a much better place, both nutritionally, but also in a way that fits and suits us best.
Mm. And it is really quite simple as well. And I bet
Mm-hmm.
eventually you find when you're coaching clients, and certainly at the beginning, everything's sort of new, but then just over time, they settle into this kind of rhythm. Um, and I call it like a baseline nutrition. And essentially, like, there's no surprises. Part of their baseline is maybe some more indulgences at a weekend.
Mhm.
And then we're just looking at, well, how does this affect the big picture of our goals? How's your energy levels? How's, if we are focusing on a little bit of weight management as well, is what we're doing helping you in that capacity? How do you feel in yourself? How's your sleep? How's your,
Mhm.
appetite? How's your emotional states? All of those sorts of things. So, you know, when it comes to this like principle, the number 10, I kind of like give people what they want early on, because I kind of know what people want. But within the coaching calls and the coaching kind of models that I use and all of that, that's where I'm giving them more so what they need and the conversations that we're having. And then you can kind of start merging everything. And as you said, all the principles are working in unison. It's not
Mhm.
just one straight after the other. It's like, right, we've ticked that box. Let's go to the next
Yeah.
one. It's like, actually, it's more like some things are going to move up the priority list, some things are going to move down. And it's always this, I guess, dance between them all and trying to keep everything in a collaborative manner. Does that sound right? I don't know.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense because that's really what it is. I like how you kind of compared it to a dance, and that's really what you're doing is you're going back and forth between the different principles and de-emphasizing something for a period of time so that you can focus on something else where maybe you're struggling. For some people, they may not have a real good understanding of the importance of vitamins and minerals and fiber intake in their diet, and so you may bring that in and help them understand, hey, you know how you say you're getting hungry every hour and a half or 2 hours. Well, let's look at what you're eating, and it may be that you can just make a few little tweaks, and then now these things are going to sustain you much more from meal to meal, and so you're moving from the honoring your hunger part down to, okay, well, you by changing some of these little tweaks to your nutrition part, that can help you to recognize your fullness better, to be more satisfied, more sustaining, and those kinds of things. And so yeah, it's really a good way to tie all of it together too. One of the other things that's really important that I think people need to understand with this aspect too is that it's really easy for us to get focused on every meal needs to look like a my plate picture.
Mm-hmm.
Every meal has to be like this Instagram worthy, nutritionally balanced meal where there's X amount of protein, X amount of veg, X amount of carbs and fats and that kind of thing. When in reality, it really comes down to what our overall diet looks like. And we can see this with kids, especially. You have a kid and the only thing they eat for a meal is like a big old huge pile of goldfish, and you're thinking, oh, that's not good. That's going to be a huge problem. There's no protein, there's no there's no vegetables there. But then the next meal, all they eat is a bunch of vegetables or a bunch of chicken. But it's really interesting in the research because we see that when kids are left alone and there isn't pressure involved, that they're by the end of the week, overall, they actually fill in all the gaps quite nicely when they're allowed to just kind of eat in a way that feels right for them and kind of intuitively. And I think we can apply those same principles to ourselves and not have these expectations that each meal needs to be this perfectly nutritionally dense meal that looks a certain way. We can it really comes down to kind of habitually what the whole diet looks like, because if you eat nothing but candy at a snack, that is not going to like suddenly just make your body go off into left field nutritionally. Or if you don't eat protein at a meal, it's not like, oh my gosh, my muscles are going to waste away. That's not how the body works. And so that's something that's a good reminder for a lot of people.
And kids as well, they don't train, they play.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's the move. they don't
Yeah.
stop. I've got a 4 year old, like, and everything's fun. And whereas, like, all of a sudden now everyone's training and being hardcore. And by the way, Jeff mentioned Goldfish there for our English listeners. They're like little biscuity snacks, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like cheesy cheddar kind of things, not actual goldfish. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
that weird over there in America, are you?
Yeah,
um,
I forgot about that. You got, yeah, the goldfish isn't the big thing there, is it? The
no,
goldfish
it's not a thing
crackers.
at all. It's
Yeah.
something that we keep in a tank and we don't eat
Yeah.
typically.
You don't eat piles of them?
No, not piles of them, not packets of them. But no, but yeah, so like kids play, pick kids regulate their appetite. Like, my son just this morning loves pancakes, but he only ate like one. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, you done? And he's like, yeah. And then it's like, all right, no pressure, no like, oh, but you've got this and eat that, this, that.
Hmm.
And later in the day, he'll just eat more. And it's like, again, we don't want to put this pressure. I know there's again tangents, Jeff, uh, weighing kids in schools and all of this sort of stuff, and it's almost, are we starting to plant the seeds early on that's going to feed into this adult kind of mentality around weight, exercise, nutrition? You've got to do this, you can't do that, you should do all of this. And it's just like, who's making these rules? They're
Hmm.
cultivated by our parents, their parents, their parents, society. And now we've got so much kind of diversity with veganism, clean eating, vegetarianism, carnivores, tracking calories, you know intuitive eating, capital I, capital E. It's just, and this is very much like a, so I guess I want to just quickly finish up with, like,
Hmm.
well, who is intuitive eating for? Who would you recommend, like, kind of consider or work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, if you're training for a bodybuilding competition, it's probably not ideal. I mean, that
Mm.
there are certain applications where it really is probably not the ideal way to approach it because you have very, very, very specific
Especially
goals.
that last 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your intuition is telling you to fucking eat.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think for most people, it can actually be incredibly beneficial. I would say the people that can really benefit from it the most would be those who have been on and off diets, on and off yo-yo dieting for many years, who are constantly looking for that next diet that's going to finally get them to where they want to be. People who are focused on or really struggling with body image issues, going through these different principles, and especially with a coach who can help you work through them, can be really helpful for those kinds of people. It can be very effective for those who are dealing with binge eating issues and struggles like that. Um, Jake Lenardon is doing some research in this area. He did a meta analysis, I think it was last year, and they looked at intuitive eating and emotional and psychological health, and there are a number of very positive outcomes that they recognized when people scored very well. Tended to be intuitive eaters. They had good positive outcomes in those areas. So people who are struggling emotionally and psychologically, it can be a very beneficial thing there too, because it takes that holistic approach. You're not eating in a way that is dictated by external rules or with the goal in mind of changing your body in a certain way. It's more about learning how to eat again, how to trust your body, and that kind of thing. So those are the people that it can be really helpful for, especially. But again, coming back to even just somebody who's really otherwise healthy and would just like to make some changes in the way that they've been eating because maybe they haven't really put any kind of priority on that, it can be really helpful there just to kind of reconnect you with your body and those kinds of things. I mean, I think ultimately it's the way all of us should eat. It
Mm.
would be because I can't tell you that I've ever encountered anybody who's gone through and really applied these principles who got to it and said, "Yeah, this just I don't like how this feels. This just does not feel good." It's like actually it's the exact opposite. So
And I think sometimes so many people are caught up in that diet culture. Like I work with people, and sometimes they're just like, "This isn't for me," because it's like it asks people to be vulnerable. It asks
Hmm.
people to. In some ways, it's harder.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In some ways, it's more challenging than just doing another diet, and almost willing to continue like those patterns that have been going on for potentially years and that will continue to go on than doing some like really short term, like hard investigative work to ultimately have that lifelong freedom, to have the
Hmm.
tough conversations, to go in with this trial and error mentality. Like I always say, listen, be coached, and like be coached by different coaches as well. And like that's there to help you grow. I've had numerous coaches because of that, and done various like things in order to grow my repertoire and
Hmm.
learn different kind of. So it could be like work with Jeff, work with somebody. Like even if you don't like it, you've still learned a great valuable lesson that maybe isn't a road down for you. There's no right or wrong. There's just a continuum of growth. And before I let you go, Jeff, because I'm aware of time, do you want to give people your best contacts, where they can find you, and how to get in contact if they wish to kind of explore this further?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you can find me on Instagram where I'm most active, and that's at intuitive.eating.min, and that's where I post content that is specifically related to intuitive eating. So try and take a problem or a struggle and then address that in a very short post to kind of think about and that kind of thing. You can also check out my podcast, which is Men's Intuition. That's on all the podcast platforms. And again, I address intuitive eating there, and I have on different guests who can bring in a different perspective. And sometimes they're men, sometimes they're women, and that can be a really helpful way to learn about intuitive eating. And even if you are working with another intuitive eating coach, it can be another perspective to kind of bring in and fill in. And then my website is hopedrivesme.com, and that's where you can contact me through either of those places. And I do offer a free 60-minute initial consultation. And so I think that that's been a very well received kind of thing for people, because it gives you a chance to spend an hour with me talking about intuitive eating, letting me know who you are, what you are about, what you're looking for, and find out if it's a good fit for you now, where you are in your life. And that can be a really helpful thing. It's a no obligation thing, a thing where if at the end you're like, okay, yeah, I don't really need to or want to work with you, but do you have any resources I can check out? I'm happy to point you in the right direction that way. And so, yeah, so those are the ways that you can contact me and talk with me.
No. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you once again, Jeff. It's always great having you on the podcast, and having a completely different perspective of things. So no, big thank you, and we'll catch you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me on.